Growing up, I, like my contemporaries and our elders, did not look to popular media, TV, books, newspapers, movies, and magazines for definition or images of ourselves, our possibilities, our community, or each other. Jim Crow was legal, and our elders were less than a generation from being descendants of enslaved Africans. My great-grandmother, Clotilde Titi, was born 13 years after Emancipation Proclamation. Her son, my grandfather, was born nearly 2 generations, 38 years later, as segregation and white supremacy propagated demeaning and stereotypical messages and stories of blacks in nearly every walk of life. I, like my contemporaries and our elders, look to our cultural grounding to mirror our lives and our possibilities. The impact of culture is posited in this quotation from cultural activist and educator Dr. Maulana Karenga. Culture is the ground of human identity, purpose, and direction. It tells you who you are, what you must do, and how you can do it. Without culture, we find ourselves without adequate self-understanding. Culture is the basis of all ideas, images, and actions. To move is to move culturally, i.e., by a set of values given to you by your culture. I would stop talking about the past if it wasn't so present. Mrs. Mildred Aristide, on returning to Haiti after a forced exile in South Africa, March of 2011. The past is never dead. It's not even past. Act 1, Scene 3, Requiem for a Nun, William Faulkner. No matter how high a house is built, it must stand on something. African proverb. I see our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, captured and forced into images they did not devise, doing hard time for all of us. Alice Walker, 1982. This was the image laid upon the dark skin of the black people by those who had the power to do it. Philip Haley, 1982. In order to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. There is no other way. Justice Harry Blackman. It is easier to build a child than to repair an adult. African proverb. From the outset, my beginning at Union, I have known that the intersection of popular media, visual culture, and identity of African American children and youth was of interest to me. I am convinced that how we make meaning is colored by what we see and perceive from what is presented about us, told about us, and shown to us about ourselves through popular media and socialization from family, school, and society. According to Petrus, images have played a key role in communication, instruction, and the general transmission of culture. Grauhol and Milkey offer in their article Culture and Conflict that blacks have been ignored, stereotyped, or demeaned in cultural images. These assertions are not unfamiliar if one also accepts the position that society constructs the social world through a series of tacit agreements mediated by images, pictures, tales, and scripts, as posited by scholars of critical race theory. Critical race scholars propose: 1, racism is ordinary, not aberrational, a normal science. 2, interest conversion or material determinism. 3, social construction, holds that race and races are products of social thought and relations. 4, dominant society racializes different minority groups at different times in response to shifting needs such as the labor market. Popular images and stereotypes of various minority groups shift over time. And 5, voice of color thesis holds that because of their different histories and experiences with oppression, blacks, Indian, Asians, and Latino writers and thinkers may be able to communicate to their white counterparts matters that the whites are unlikely to know. Further, exploration to understand why critical race theory scholars are divided into realist and idealist positions, and grasping the underlying factors which inform hallmarks of critical race theory: the interest conversion, material determinism, and racial realism. Additionally, the importance of revisionist history to critical race theory and the friction between liberalism and CRT must be understood to make a thorough analysis of CRT's application for the scholarship proposed here. In this interrogation of my thesis, African American children and youth are disconnected from and have lost sight of African cultural models of resiliency, resistance, survival, and victory that provided a heightened sense of self-esteem, identity, and a commitment to each other for preceding generations of Africans born in America. These children and youth do not benefit from models of success and achievement that reside within the full span of their cultural legacy that extends beyond the arrival of Antony, Isabella, Pedro, and 17 other Africans on the shores in August of 1619 in Jamestown on the Dutch man of war, a year before the arrival of the celebrated Mayflower, 113 years before the birth of George Washington, and 246 years before the 13th Amendment. My interpretation of images, symbols, and signs which dominate messages and stories about African American children and youth in today's popular media, culture, and visual culture suggests negative portrayals, refreshed and redressed stereotypes, and major distortions. Though some of the most heinous images, symbols, and signs of African Americans have been removed from popular culture, vestiges of them remain. Stereotypes of blacks may not have been eliminated, but changed in character, taking subtler and more indirect forms, as suggested in the article Blacks in Children's Books. Further, Beatrice posits the impact of stereotypes in white-on-black images of Africa and blacks in Western popular culture. Stereotypes are based on simplification and generalization or the denial of individuality. They can be either negative or positive. Though they may have no basis in reality, stereotypes are real in their social consequences, notably with regard to the allocation of roles. They tend to function as self-fulfilling prophecies. The targets of stereotyping are maneuvered into certain roles so that a vicious cycle develops in which social reality seems to endorse the stereotype. Social representation echoes social realities, which are in turn modeled upon social representation. A kind of societal typecasting is set up from which it is difficult to escape. Obviously, what is at stake in these representations are not just the images themselves, but also their social ramifications. Too many black children and youth are not prepared to make it through the formative years, let alone succeed in their teenage years and beyond. Black families, the cultural fabric that provided glue to generations across the centuries, appear threadbare in the 21st century, as there are 36 million disconnected youth in America. These youth, 60% black and Hispanic, have left high school, lack credentials, and are unemployed. It is projected that by 2020, according to Dr. Jawanzo Kunjufu, that 2 of 3 African American males will be involved in the penal system. Further, Dr. Manning Marable, in Incarceration versus Education, Reproducing Racism and Poverty in America, asserts that too many black children are taught at an early age that their only future resides in a prison or jail. African American youth amount to 15% of all American juveniles. However, they represent 26% of all juveniles who are arrested by the police nationwide. They are 58% of all youth who are sentenced to serve time in state prisons. I will substantiate through scholarly literature and research my thesis that black children and youth are unaware of the rich cultural heritage that sustained their ancestors through routine and legal terror, assaults, degradation, and more as they fought for health and survival in the country that disavowed their birthright to full and protected citizenship. A country whose wealth emanates from nest eggs hatched from free labor amassed from enslaved Africans, ancestors to today's black families. We, as African Americans, must recognize that we are custodians as well as heirs of a great civilization. We have given something to the world as a race, and for this we are proud and fully conscious of our place in the total picture of humankind's development. This was offered by Mary McLeod Bethune in her last will and testament in 1955 as she reflected on 78 years old as she reflected at 78 years old upon her life's work to educate and advance the cause of black equality and freedom. Frequently, black children and youth do not have opportunities to learn and value their cultural origins and associated knowledge. Consider that a survey titled Images of Blacks in American Children's Picture Books, 1899 to 1999, revealed that from 1899 to 1939, black characters in picture books were portrayed as childlike, stupid, greedy, and subservient. From 1940 to 1959, this period was characterized as the all-white world of children's books, and it was not until 1970 to 1999 that the black voice emerged to bring African Americans to the world of picture books. While these children and youth appear in more positive and humane roles in today's picture books and other popular media, they are still depicted in a peripheral and stagnant role in world history and contemporary society. Seldom are leadership roles, scholarship, beauty, and goodness attributed to black children and youth in popular media. This assumption will be explored through literature and scholarly research to inform its credibility. Other assumptions that I make about popular media imaging of African American youth and reinforced by beginning explorations in scholarly literature are: 1. In popular media, black children and youth are merely white children and youth colored black, thus allowing no cultural grounding or collective cultural historical foundation rooted in African ancestry and rising from African enslavement in North America. 2. Popular media denies black children and youth links to African ancestry and its legacy as a source of self-knowledge, direction, and models of humanity, community, and progress, which also limits ancestral beginnings to North America. 3. Limits accomplishments, aptitudes, and capacities to athletics and entertainment. 4. Conflates problem solving, critical thinking, and effective communication with the desire of whiteness, suggesting that blackness does not encompass such capacity. 5. Abhors self-knowledge beyond popular media portrayals, which depict buffoonery, gender confusion, relationship imbalance, and improprieties, elders devoid of wisdom. 6. Defines the lives of black children, youth, and families in comparison to whites as the norm. 7. Relegates safety, rescue, and future prospects for black children and youth to non-black persons and communities. 8. Denies a full spectrum of black humanity beyond what will maintain the status quo of white-black power dynamics. Popular media, as visual culture, dominates the social landscape. It constructs realities that comment on politics, economics, gender identity, racial and cultural identity, historical significance, and prospects for the future. Consider the import of just one popular media, cinema, as posited by Dr. Kashani. It is at once an art form and a medium of communication, and can be an instrument of mass entertainment, a teaching machine, a consumer product, a conduit of human history, or a vehicle for social change. Popular media provides the landscape on which meaning is transmitted, purpose is negotiated, power is situated, and roles are defined and enacted. It further situates polarization along racial lines, establishing a binary of white-black in which, as an old adage goes, white is right and black get back. As proposed by Petrus in her book White on Black indicates a relationship, and the order of the term identifies the dominant partner, the producers and consumers of the images in question. Further, the impact of this binary colors the lens through which relations are staged, and nearly all of Western culture is enacted. Consider the following, though often thought of benign and innocent use of this simple binary when situated as simply colors. In the semantics of popular culture, whiteness is often associated with innocence and goodness. Brides wear white on their wedding day to signify purity. Snow White is a universal fairy tale of virtue receiving its just reward. In talk of near-death experiences, patients almost always report a blinding white light, perhaps a projection of a hoped-for positive and benign spiritual force. In contrast, darkness and blackness often carry connotations of evil and menace. One need only read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad to see how strongly imagery of darkness conveys evil and terror. We speak of black gloom. Persons deemed unacceptable are said to be blackballed or blacklisted. Villains are often depicted as swarthy or wearing black clothing. Whiteness is also the normative. It sets the standard. While Heart of Darkness does evince a good example of how darkness connotes badness, it also deserves further interrogation to determine how it has caused others to think and become conscious of issues of race and darkness. Additionally, this scholarship could be extended to include what scholars, thinkers, writers, teachers, actors, talking heads, and others have added to this scholarly conversation. Though popular media as consumed through TV and other platforms appear innocuous, that so understates its power, mission, and impact. As Bell Hooks eloquently states in Cultural Criticism and Transformation, popular culture is where the pedagogy is. It's where the learning is. It is a dominant voice and presence in the lives of African American children and youth. It is the voice that speaks the loudest. With 24-hour TV programming and cable access, African American children and youth can look at themselves and be seen absent in dominant narratives as well as present through negative portrayals in both children's and general programming options. According to Dr. Jawanzo Kunjufu in his book Solutions for Black America, black children and youth watch 38 hours of television and listen to 18 hours of rap music a week. Their viewing of TV and other media surpasses that of white children and youth. A study from the Kaiser Family Foundation found that black and Hispanic children consume nearly 4.5 hours more media daily. 13 hours of total media exposure for Hispanics, 12.59 seconds for blacks, and 8.36 for whites. Black children spend nearly 6 hours and Hispanics just 5.5 hours compared to roughly 3.5 hours a day for white youth. Though African Americans of every generation have countered and resisted demeaning and stereotypical caricatures of themselves as promulgated throughout public discourse, these images persist and is available for consumption by black children and youth. Proliferation of these images help maintain the status quo, the distribution of power, and access to resources from education, medical, housing, employment, and more. These images are bombarded to the unconscious and conscious minds of black children and youth who sometimes internalize, accept, and begin to live out these negative suggestions and place themselves in boxes constructed from racist habits and conveniences as suggested by Delgado and Stefanik. Long preoccupied with issues of identity, American society prefers to place its citizens into boxes based on physical attributes and culture. No science supports this practice. It is simply a matter of habit and convenience. These same images become a primary source from which many white persons respond and relate to African Americans. According to the Pew Center for People and the Press, 52% of Americans use television as their source of local news. Local news helps form opinions and perceptions, negative and positive. It is far too often the introduction to members of marginalized and minority groups within dominant communities. Further, local news may help disseminate group biases and stereotypes while also labeling groups as threats against one's person and property. Critical interrogation of models articulated by Dr. Jawanzo Kunjufu, Dr. Maulana Karanga, and other reputable scholars involved in the conversation of social justice, power relations, self-determination, possibilities, and potentials for children and youth, and culture as a source of lessons and models on which to construct opportunity and to restore values and traditions of African American culture. Through these models, African American children can reconnect to the vitality and legacy of their African cultural heritage. These models include the Children's Window to Africa, 1994 to 2002, a cultural heritage program in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that helped children and youth access models of an African American cultural legacy to mirror and extend their potential and possibilities. Another model is the Knowledge is Power program established in 1994 in Houston, Texas, the African American Image Talent Center located in Chicago, and the W.E.B. Du Bois Learning Center in Kansas City, Missouri. Critical and interpretive analysis using tenets of critical race theory and principles and values espoused in Kawaida, an African-centered value system in which culture is essentialized as a necessity in all aspects of healthy development as posited in its guiding 7 principles. Critical interpretive content analysis of popular media, mass culture, visual cultural image, signs and symbols, representative historically and contemporarily of black children and youth will help guide this scholarship. It is easier to build a child than to repair an adult. African proverb. Culture is the ground of humanity, purpose and direction. It tells you who you are, what you must do, and how you can do it. Without culture, we find ourselves without adequate self-understanding. Culture is the basis of all ideas, images, and directions. To move is to move culturally, by a set of values given to you by your culture. Dr. Maulana Karenga. Theses: African American children and youth have lost sight of African cultural models of resiliency, resistance, survival, and victory that provided a heightened sense of self-esteem, identity, and a commitment to each other for preceding generations of Africans born in America. Through this scholarship, I suggest ways and models to reconnect and place in direct sightline African American cultural models of resistance, survival, and victory to provide a heightened sense of self-esteem, identity, and commitment to each other as cultural investments made by ancestors are claimed and reinvested for the benefit of upcoming generations.